is Software Meets Business, a podcast sponsored by Head Channel.
Welcome to another episode of Software Meets Business. Today I have got Nicholas Johnston with me, who's the Chief Executive of ECC. Hi, Nicholas.
Hi there.
So, I think we've got a lot of interesting things to talk about today, but one of the key things is always good just to get a bit of background about you and ECC. If you could enlighten us, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, we're a bit of a niche organisation, so probably people won't necessarily have heard of us. Even if you know what ECC stands for, which I will tell you, it probably won't help in terms of working at what we do. So ECC is the Educational Competencies Consortium, which is a mouthful. So that's why we kind of go with ECC instead. We are a very small not-for-profit. We've been established about 30 years. We work with mainly universities, but a few colleges and sort of think tanks and a couple of independent schools. And we work with their HR departments. So really I said we're kind of niche. We're the sort of the biggest player in a very small pond, which is the world of pay and reward in mainly higher education, but also further education. And so we work with those HR teams to help them to get it right, essentially, in terms of how they assess different roles in the organisation and then fairly allocate them to pay. How
big's ECC? Is it, and how big's your kind of user base?
So ECC, as a company, we're very small. We've got 11 staff, about to be 12. And when you add on one member of staff and you're that small, you're kind of adding about 9% increase in headcount just by one person. So it's not the same as going from 100 to 101. So we're pretty small. We run pretty lean. We have 134 members. So the member is the university or the college. And there's kind of annual subscription model. And to put that in context, we've got about probably 2/3 or maybe 70% of universities in the UK are members of ECC and use our system and our team.
Okay. So tell me a little bit about your journey with, because you've got, my understanding, you've got a system in place now, but take us back to the start or the pre that system. What was how was it looking? I mean, did you have a system? Was it just all Excel spreadsheets?
I mean, if you go long and far enough back in history, it probably was before my time. As I say, we've been around for about 30 years. I've been involved for about 11 or 12 now. So when I joined, we did have a software system which does job evaluation, which is essentially how do you assess all these different roles? The receptionist, the head of estates, the director of finance. How do you assess them fairly in order to kind of rank them and decide where they sit in the pay scale? And obviously in a unionised environment, that's pretty important. You need to get it right. And the costs of getting it wrong are significant. So certainly in all the time that I've been involved, we've always had some software that enables that process to happen. It contains the sort of scoring methodology and questions and responses and algorithms and so on. If we go back far enough, we didn't actually own that piece of software. We owned the intellectual property in the scheme, the scoring bit, but not the actual software, which meant, so this is going back about 10 years, it meant that if we wanted to make any changes to that, basically we couldn't. It wasn't our system. So
was that a system that was supplied to other people as well, or was it just yours?
So the kind of scoring bit, the bit you would use to evaluate a university role, that was bespoke to us. That was closed off only for our members. But the software platform that it sat within was the same as the civil service system. So you've got us as a small niche not-for-profit desperately wanting some kind of change to the software. And if the civil service says no, then it ain't going to happen. So that was quite constraining and made it quite difficult. So about 10 years ago, we replaced that system, built it from the ground up. And that worked well enough until about 18 months ago, which is the kind of the reason why we're talking today, really. That system had come to the end of its life. And what we wanted was something that was going to be bang up to date in terms of cybersecurity, much more flexible in terms of reporting and management information, better user experience, cloud-based, all of those kind of things.
Right. Okay. Is that, and do you know, was that because you said it had come to the end of its life? Is that because you couldn't extend it anymore because there weren't, it was written in a language that no one...
it wasn't outdated in that sense, but so we could continue to work with it, but it sat on a physical server. And the hardware side, and now I'm not a techie, but as I understand it, the physical hardware of the server and whatever magic software makes that host things, that was being kind of made redundant. That was beyond getting to the point of beyond support. So we have a system which is running in 130 universities and quite critical to their whole pay and grading structure. And really, its time had come. So that was one big driver, was just the redundancy of the existing setup. And the other was obviously new threats in terms of cybersecurity, which just didn't exist 8 years ago when we built that original system.
So you wanted to put something that was not on a physical server that you didn't have to look after anymore, just in the cloud somewhere, nice and easy. Someone else can look after that, worry about the physical security of the server and all of those pieces. Okay, great. So how did you know, or did you know it was time to move to a new system for a long time, and then it took a while to go through the process of working out, what that would look like? Just talk us through that.
I mean, it happened over a pretty short time frame, really. So probably maybe 2 years ago now, we went to our existing provider and said, thinking of the future, where's IT going? I mean, I think people knew what the letters AI stood for, but it wasn't really a thing, or certainly wasn't really on our radar at that point. So, I mean, a lot happens in a couple of years, doesn't it? But it was that kind of time, and we thought, looking to the future, what should we be thinking about? And we started to have that conversation with them, and they basically said, well, it's funny you should ask, but in fact your server's going to be redundant in 18 months' time anyway. So we thought, oh, that's okay, there's a burning platform here, so we need to do something. So from that point of realization 2 years ago to, right, we need to really work out what we're going to do. We've got to commission something. Are we going to stick with our existing provider? Do we find somebody new? What does that new system look like? That was all quite a quick process, and it's probably less than 6 months before we then had someone actually starting work on it.
Okay. And what did you go with the incumbent provider?
No, so we spoke to them. We spoke to 2 or 3 suppliers. It's a funny thing because it's quite a specialist functionality that we're trying to build. And it might be a massive project for us, but for a lot of providers, it's really pretty small beer. So we didn't want to go with like a massive household name for whom this would just be one tiny little project. We wanted it to be maybe not comparable size to us, but quite a small kind of SME, that this would really matter. This would be an important project for them, and they would give it due attention. And also they would want some kind of partnership longer term. So we didn't want to just pop into the equivalent of kind of Argos IT and say, can we have a system, please? And they say, pick it up at counter number 6, and you go, and that's it, done. We genuinely wanted a kind of partnership, and that's what we got. But the first thing that we did, and this is probably the most important step, and certainly I would say the first learning opportunity, was we realized that obviously we don't have an in-house IT person. We run really lean, as I say. And so we knew we needed to get someone who understood that language and could kind of broker our layman's requirements and speak the techie language and kind of translate the two and make sure that what was being built is actually what we wanted. So the first thing was to find somebody to fulfill that role. And so we spoke to a couple of people who do that kind of thing, and found a great company called Berendo. I don't mind giving them a name check. They were brilliant. And we still work with them today on kind of odd things. But they almost became our in-house IT person. So if you had an IT project manager who works in your firm and you ring them up and ask them to do stuff, that's what they did for us.
And was that through a recommendation, or did you sort of go out to the market and just ask around?
A bit of a mixture, a bit of a kind of LinkedIn network search, web search. Again, looking for a company who does that, isn't so small that you think, well, there's only kind of two of them. What happens if one falls over? Not so big that they're completely faceless. Just that we wanted a good cultural fit, and that's what we got with those guys. So they were they felt like an extension of our team, really, which is what we wanted.
I guess a lot of people that will listen to this in the future, they'd be interested in that question of how did you know they were the right fit? Why did you discount the other people that you've spoken to that were offering the same service?
And I don't really have a formula for that, to be honest. It just, I suppose we had some requirements. It wasn't really a formal kind of tendering process. It was have a bit of a chat, a bit like this, and see if there's a connection. Do they understand what we are trying to do? And then get them to submit a proposal and all the rest of it. So I don't really have this is how to find your ideal outsourced IT person.
I think it's interesting though, because a lot of people come to this as non-technical people. They've got a great idea. They know the domain that they want to build the app in, or the idea, or they know that domain backwards, but they need to find someone to partner with, as you said, who can act as their CTO, their IT manager, and then help them then find a software developer who can actually build the platform and speak the language, do that translation from the business to the technical side and back.
I mean, the other, I suppose what helped us with that, and it actually helped us all through the project, is our board is mainly made up of HR directors or assistant HR directors. So they understand the detail of the work that my team, our consultants and trainers do day to day. They get that stuff. What they don't know is IT. Like, I don't know IT either. But very happily, we had an IT director from a university join our board. And that was, I think, probably quite a significant benefit in terms of this project. So she was interested because, here's a small company which the university already works with, and they're doing this kind of IT project, and she can add some value, and so that was great. So I think having her there as part of that process of selecting, firstly, Berendo as our kind of out-of-house, in-house IT function, and then reviewing the kind of the bids and the tenders in from the providers, that was really helpful, and then hand-holding through the whole development process.
Okay, so you've got Berendo on board, and then what happens? You said something about a tender? Did you put a tender process together?
When we built the previous system, sort of the one about 8 or 10 years ago, we'd gone out with a sort of full functional spec, like a big chunk, and again we got somebody external to help us write that, because I don't know how to put that together. So that was like one of these big sort of 2-inch thick, almost paper exercises, and but this time around, in my naivety, I thought, well, that's probably what we need to do again. But it became clear pretty quickly that everything's very agile and very fluid and much more flexible, and it's more about scoping out, I guess, at a strategic level, what your requirements are, what the kind of user journeys are that you want, and then somebody clever will go off and build something, and through an agile process come back kind of iteratively and say, how's this looking? So we didn't have a kind of manual to say, right, go and build this. What we did have was the one from the previous, from 8 years ago. So we were able to say, in terms of core functionality, this is as it was described 8 years ago. So there's something. So where Berendo were able to help us was to come up with a sort of statement of requirements, almost, that we could go to the market with and say, here's the kind of thing we want to build. Talk to us, let's have a kind of informal dialogue, and then come back with a proposal, timelines and costs. So that was the process we followed. And we, I I think we spoke to 3 different companies, including the incumbent provider as well.
So you gave them all the statement of requirements, and then they came back with an idea of costs?
There was a bit of kind of
Timeline?
dialogue. So they met with different people in our team to try and work out what is it that we do day to day, what do these universities do with this system, what do we like about what we have at the moment, what do we want to do in the future. So we had that kind of dialogue, and then yes, they came in with some tenders, and we'd worked out a sort of scoring system to evaluate them. So that's the process that we went through.
Let me just interrupt this podcast for a few seconds. I just wanted to let you know about our wonderful sponsor, Headchannel. Headchannel builds software engineering teams, and they've been building software for clients since 2003. They have a very simple engagement model. Either they develop and run it, or they build it and you run it. They could also help with finding a fractional CTO if you need that support. You can find them at headchannel.co.uk. And now back to the podcast.
Did you have a requirement spec that you said you had a requirement spec or a statement of requirements that you sent out to everyone? And then there was, how many people came back and responded?
I think it was 3 in the end. Three in the end. And again, we were quite choosy in terms of who we even asked to pitch for the work, because again, we didn't want a kind of massive monolithic company. So they needed to be of a size where we thought, they've got cover, they can do this, they've got a track record, they've done this before. But we wanted this project to matter to them. And I don't mean to be too disparaging of larger companies and suggest that projects don't matter to them, but wanted them to understand that this was quite a chunky project for us.
Yeah. Absolutely. And so so the 3 that sort of responded, were they all similar, or was there differences between them?
Quite a difference in estimated costs. So one of them, I think, whether deliberately or not, I don't know, but they just really priced themselves out of contention. And then with the others, it just came down to, obviously we'd had a bit of dialogue, and it just came down to I guess you buy people ultimately, don't you? So yes, you want to know what the document says and what are they saying, and if they've got the right quality marks and whatever they've got. But it's about confidence in the people, and that's very much our business as well. We're consultancy and training, and yes, we have a job evaluation system, but ultimately universities and colleges need to have confidence in us. So it was a kind of combination of heart and head, I suppose.
Yeah. And so on the costing piece, so obviously, did they come back with a fixed cost? Did you have a fixed cost?
We did end up with a fixed cost with the company that we went with, yeah.
And was that by design, or did that just happen?
I'm trying to remember. I think, because they went back and forth quite a bit, and this is where Berendo as a sort of intermediary, but ultimately on our side, were really helpful. So they were able to say, yeah, you're kind of in the right ballpark, but you sort of need to cut your cloth to suit. ECC is a small organisation. So, I mean, we turn over about 1.2 million, so we're not huge. And the project value we had in mind was probably about 300,000. So in terms of the size of our business, massive. But it meant that it couldn't be 450 or, there was a limit. So I think Berendo were able to sort of say, okay, there is a sort of limit to the budget here, and so we need to make sure we can manage that cost. We cannot have cost escalation. So we had a fixed cost with a contingency, quite a sizable contingency built in.
Yeah. So you signed that off and you got started, and then what was the process?
The process was pretty rapid, and because of the agile methodology, you start to see results pretty quickly. So it started with a bit of, obviously we've been speaking to our users already, saying new system coming, great news. The greatest news for them was they didn't have to put their hand in the pocket. We built up money in our reserves in order to fund this project. So we were able to say to our users, you're going to get a new system. It's going to be, gold standard in terms of security, better user experience, and we're not going to charge anything for it. So quite good. quite a good message to go out with, really. So we engaged them. We've had various workshops in terms of these kind of user journeys and different things that different people wanted out of the system. With such a small kind of constituency, though, you've got to be really careful, because we've got 130 organisations using it, between probably 1 and 5 people in each organisation using this system. So you're talking a few hundred users, not thousands or 10,000s. So when you've got a few hundred, 3 or 4 people say this would be a great idea. Do you run with that and think, well, that's a good, 3 or 4 out of 400 is a lot? Or do you think, well, that might be just the 3 or 4 individuals who would ever have that? So you need to kind of moderate what you think is going to work for the greatest number of people, with some genuinely bright ideas coming from individuals as well. So there's quite a lot of user engagement and user groups through the whole project.
Yeah, so that was great. So because you're embracing the agile process, so you got a fixed cost, but that was basically for an amount of effort. And then obviously you started engaging with the people who are going to use the system, and then things obviously changed. So that meant, because you were using agile, you could actually change what you wanted. You didn't have fixed, rigid requirements. You could change what you needed as you went along. So a lot of people are worried about this. They think that it's much better to have a fixed cost with a determined set of requirements, and there's that's what they want. But what was your experience? Was it better to have that ability to change things as you went along?
I think that flexibility was quite good, Rich, actually, because although at the core, you had to replicate the system that we already had. So you have to have the same questions, the same scoring algorithm in the background, so that when you run a job through the old system and you run it through the new system, you get exactly the same number of points coming out the other end. So the core of it, absolutely rigid, had to be identical. I don't care how they built it, as long as it did the same thing. In terms of functionality, it had to be the same. But where the flexibility came in and fluidity was more around some of the user experience design, user interface stuff, probably around reporting. So we had a number of management information reports in the old system, and our starting assumption was we'll get all of these rebuilt. But in fact, as we went through it, particularly with the user involvement, we thought, well, some of these reports, yeah, they're fine. Let's have them again. Some really aren't used very much, so why build something that isn't going to be used? Here's another MI requirement that nobody's really mentioned before. Let's put that one in. We didn't have that one before. And here's some things that are probably not urgent, possibly out of budget, but they'll be on my development list, for next year. So that flexibility was really good, because if we'd had the kind of 2-inch thick functional spec again, they would have built exactly what was written in that manual, and that's what you would have got. So yeah, it gives you certainty, but you lose that flexibility.
Yeah. So, and I think it's a struggle for people sometimes to get their head around, because the idea is that you're going into this, you can spend a significant, 6 figures basically, and you're going to you're going to get into that, and you're not actually going to know exactly what's going to be delivered at the end of it, because things are going to change along the way. You're going to find that you don't need some reports. You're going to find that you don't need a couple of screens. You're going to find that you do need something that hasn't been mentioned previously, that actually becomes, well, we really do need this, otherwise it's not going to work for us. But you had that flexibility. You weren't locked into, oh, that's a change request.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I suppose just kind of allied to that point, the whole timing issue was another, the sort of time, cost and quality triangle. So that the time issue was really important as well, because, as I said, the server was going kind of end of life. And so we knew that was going to happen end of January 25. So, this is just a few months ago. And it's just over 12 months ago that we signed the contract with the provider. So the whole thing's happened in the last year. So as we went through 2024 and into the autumn, the original go live date was going to be November. Now, by September, it became clear that wasn't going to be possible. Partly as I say, the core vision was always the same. Some of the peripheral kind of requirements changed and moved around in terms of order of importance. So that kind of delayed things. There were some resourcing issues in terms of the provider, even though let's go for one that's big enough that they can cover things. There were a couple of things that fell through the gaps a little bit there. So we lost a little bit of time there. There were some questions about cost, because it was a fixed cost, but how much of the contingency were we going to have to dip into? So, and on such a short build period, if you lose a week having that kind of dialogue, that's X% of the whole project length. So we knew November wasn't going to be hit. We're then into, okay, do we try and squeeze it in before Christmas and then have kind of no user testing when the university sector shuts down for 2 weeks, Christmas, New Year? Do we really be brave and say, no, we'll work right up until we can? The IT guys, poor souls, we're going to be working over Christmas and New Year anyway, so we've got that extra development time. Do we then go live mid-January with only 2 weeks before the old server is turned off? And that's what we did in the end. So it was right up to the wire.
Wow, you went live 2 weeks before. Did you have quite, so what was your user acceptance period? Did you have a UAT period, or did you just do QA? Or?
I think 3 weeks. But as I say, if we'd used up 2 of the 3 weeks in the time that people are on holiday, that's not really very fair. So we had lots of kind of internal testing, and we had some external users that were, in a kind of safe sandbox type environment where they could have a look at it and check it out. But yeah, the actual UAT was probably about 3 weeks in January. So yeah, it was within days of the guillotine coming down on the old system.
Blimey! Did you have a backup plan for that, or was that it just had to happen?
Absolutely, yeah. Good question. So we had a couple of backup plans. One was we could, at some expense, persuade the people who had the old server to kick it into life again and keep it going for another month or another month or another month. That was going to cost. The alternative was to pick up the old software and drop it into the cloud, basically, with the new provider. So again, a bit of cost to do that and sort of wasted effort, but that would at least allow continuity. So that was probably the more likely thing that we would have done. But we had those two possible contingencies, neither of which we had to go with happily.
Well, that's good. Well, looking back is always good. What do you think you would do differently if you were going to do it again? What would be the big lessons?
You always want more lead time. I think budget-wise we were okay. I think we managed to allow the right amount of budget and managed that fairly well. We had an internal as well as the external kind of IT expert. We had a member of my team seconded basically for quite a few months as a project manager on this. I would have made that, that was like half a week. I would have made it probably full-time because we were always chasing our tail in terms of internal resource just to keep up with the kind of project development and keep track of the costs and the build and be able to respond to that agile, that iterative process. So I think we under-resourced that project management side. The other learning point I would say, if I had my time again, was we then had a quite a dramatic shift from, right, it's built, into, okay, it's now business as usual. So that meant a handover from our internal project manager to another colleague who's kind of in charge of it in terms of business as usual, which was okay. But of course, the developer had the same change. It went from the development team to the kind of maintenance account management team. And I hadn't really anticipated that. So we had, although there was an overlap, I think a bigger overlap would have been better because you've got the client side and the provider side, both, they're both changing faces. So yeah, so that, I think we lost a little bit of ground there. And that was just as it was being launched. We're into kind of hypercare, which was a sort of 4-week period as well. So that was a really busy time, kind of January, February time.
Yeah, interesting. So, I mean, how does it feel now? You're out of it, out of the, the hypercare piece, so everything's obviously settled down, I hope.
It has, settled down. Lots of kind of password resets. It's easy to kind of blame the user, isn't it? But you tell people this is the process, this is what you're going to have to do, this is, and still, so that soaked up a lot of support time internally and from the provider's side as well. So that was a bit of a drag. That's all settled down. There's nothing functionally wrong with the thing. It works as it should. It looks like it should. What we wanted was something that looked familiar enough to people that they weren't completely thrown. When kind of Windows does a new generation, you can't find anything suddenly. The icons have all changed, they're in different places. So we wanted to look familiar enough that people weren't confused, because it's not a system you use all day, every day. It's for a purpose. And so some people might be using it most days, others maybe only every couple of weeks. So it's not the sort of thing that you would get used to quickly if it was profoundly different. So it needed to be familiar, but we wanted to kind of clean it up, change the color palette. We had new branding at the same time as well, so we don't want to put that into it. So that's all kind of settled down. Reception has been well received, so that side of it's been good. We've got a nice long list of future developments that we want to do, and that's where that partnership relationship with the IT provider comes in. So we're able to talk to those guys and say, this is what we've got in mind. What do you think we should be thinking about? It's a year since we started to sort of spec this out, and we've now had it in place for 4 or 5 months. What does it look like in a year's time? So we're now having that kind of dialogue with them. So it's a journey that doesn't quite end, I don't think. It's just an important staging point that we're at, and then we need to continue.
Yeah. No, it's been an interesting story. So I suppose, sort of just rounding up, other non-profits that are considering going through this approach, any sort of headline things that you can think of?
Get someone, if you don't have someone who understands this stuff technically, find someone that you can trust, and that may be just through recommendation. We were lucky, we had a board member who understands this and was able to ask the right questions, and as I say, we found this kind of external company to fulfill that IT manager role. That was really essential. And I think that frees you up in a sense to focus on what you really do know, which is hopefully your own business and your own service and your clients, and obviously involving them. So I think that if that's where your strength is, which hopefully it is, understanding your own business, stick to that, buy in the expertise you don't have.
And do you think there's just one kind of final thing? I often hear people say that they need to find someone with specific experience of, their business sector. Do you think, did you go for that this time?
No, not really. I suppose I might be able to imagine a kind of IT project or a build where that is important. I don't think it was really with this. Had they been absolutely grounded in the university sector, it might have sped up some of those kind of early sort of user journeys, because they would understand what a reward manager is or a business partner, or they would have a sense of that. But I don't think that really mattered.
No,
because
you're the expert.
That. We understand that bit.
Yeah.
Okay. And the users were able to express that as well.
Excellent. Okay. Well, Nicholas, thank you so much. The future of ECC, you've got a big backlog of things that you can add into the system. Are you thinking about building any other bits of software as well, or is this is the future with ECC like this main tool?
This is the main thing. So we do have a kind of development list. I mentioned AI earlier. We've got a couple of ideas on AI that really we need to.
Normally sets off a buzzer when people mention that, but it's not working today.
It's like a kind of buzzword bingo. But there's two things that we want to do. That one is, so this whole process, this job evaluation process of understanding the director of estate's role, and what does that person do? What are the responsibilities? What level are they? Going through our questionnaire in the software and getting a score. It's quite a skilled process. It's not, just click a button. So we train people to do that stuff. But I think there is a role for some kind of AI assistance there to maybe speed that up or challenge it in some way. So I can see a kind of function in there where you do that piece of work and you say, well, that's come out at 619 points. And I could see it quite useful if it said, well, actually, directors of estates typically they're more 700 points. Why are you? You're a bit low on the communication side. You're a bit high on the decision making side of things. So I can see some kind of functionality which would hopefully be quite helpful in there. And the other thing that I think would be really exciting is we've essentially got 130 separate databases in this system. So understandably, the University of X shouldn't be allowed to browse the roles of the University of Y. Absolutely fine, that's their data. But I can see we could add some value by looking across that whole data set, those 130 databases. So, as things stand, unless I looked in every one, I wouldn't necessarily be able to tell you what directors of estates job titles are. Are they called estates director, director of property and resources? I have no idea. So even something as basic as that, I could see you could send some little bot not to harvest the data, but just to try and understand what's the intelligence in here, what kind of roles are being created, what are the trends, maybe where are things going. So there's something in there that I haven't quite defined yet, but it's like an itch I want to scratch. Really.
Yeah, some kind of benchmarking as well across the board.
Almost. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. All right. Well, we wish you and ECC all the best for the future. Thank you so much for spending the time to talk to us on the podcast today. I know. I know it's always interesting to talk through, kind of get those memories back of that journey that you have building some software, and it'll be interesting to our listeners too. So thank you, Nicholas. Thank you so much for your time.
Good, pleasure.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Software Meets Business, the podcast sponsored by Head Channel. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a rating and review on your preferred platform.